Next, we have Munesh Makhija, Vice President, G India Technology Center. And his talk is going to be centered around why every industrial company needs a digital strategy. Welcome, Munesh.
Hi. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Morning. Already a long morning. I think a lot longer on what's going on outside this room, even. So I see a lot of people on their phones. I'm not sure what's going on, but looks like there's going to be a new president in the largest, or in the oldest democracy in the world. And in the largest democracy in the world, where we're sitting, I went to bed last night with 3,510 rupees in my wallet. And I woke up this morning with 10 rupees in my wallet. So it's a volatile world, to say the least. Do I have a slide changer for my slides? Yeah. So if you think about what we've been discussing this morning around the Internet of Things, I really want to talk a bit about why this matters. Why this matters to an industrial world. A lot of the discussion we've had this morning is around, the consumer world, all the possibilities, how our lives will change. But if you think about the basics of what sustains life on this planet, it's things like energy, it's things like heat, it's things like water, it's things like transportation, it's things like healthcare. And my submission to all of you is that while these things seem like they're far away from being disrupted, nothing could be further from the truth. Nothing could be further from the truth. And therefore, I titled my talk, Why Every Industrial Company Needs a Digital Strategy. If you went to bed as an industrial company last night, you're going to wake up either as a digital company or no company at all. And the question is, are you disrupting yourself fast enough, or is someone else coming along and doing that to you? And that's really, I think, where we have to think about it. And my appeal to the 450 startups that are looking at IoT in India would be, don't ignore the world of basic life-sustaining infrastructure. Don't ignore that world, because that is the world that will actually change people's lives. And this is, we in GE, we've worked on these in these domains for over 100 years, and we're actually going through this transformation ourselves, trying to become a digital company from where we started with our industrial roots. So that's a bit of what I want to talk about. We talked about this thing around volatility and slow growth. So just a few years ago, in 2010, the world was growing at 4.35% aggregated GDP growth across the world. In the last 5 years, that has come down by 43%. So growth in the world is 2.46% today. What does that do? In addition to slower growth, the mix has completely changed. 6 years ago, 3 of the top 5 companies in terms of size and market cap in the world were oil companies. Today there are 0 on that list. So the mix has completely changed. Nobody predicted any of this. If you look at, we're watching the US elections, I mentioned that. Who would have thought a year and a half ago that a reality TV host who runs hotels and casinos might actually be the president of the United States? These are not things we can predict. We just have to be agile enough to respond to these things, no matter where we are. So, what does it mean for organizations to become digital? It's more than sensors and data. It's culture as well. It's culture as well, it's thought process, its ability to move with speed, kind of behave like a startup. A lot of startups are very focused and move with speed. And if you just look at, in this backdrop of slower growth and higher volatility, companies are measured by how much value they generate. Productivity of the world, if you will, in the decade preceding this one, every year we generated 4% of industrial productivity in the world. In the last 5 years, that 4% has become 1%. So now you have a slower growth world with much lower productivity. That creates just tremendous pressure on countries, economies, and companies to perform differently. IoT and the industrial internet is actually a way to change the game, is actually a way to increase productivity, increase predictivity, and drive outcomes differently. And that's, I think we've talked about some of this morning, but I just wanted to highlight one piece of this. Just two messages. One would be, now, if you look at Marriott and Starwood, they came together, I think about a year and a half ago. They own 4,000 properties, maybe it's up to 5,000 now, in about 110 countries. And that company is worth about $18 billion. Airbnb can lease out 2 million properties in 190 countries, worth $30 billion, and owns none of them. So the disruption is not just in the technology, but also tremendously in the business model. What is the number 2 search engine in the world? Anybody? Number 2. Kind of a quiet room for a group of very smart people. But I would contend it doesn't matter. It actually doesn't matter what number 2 is. Because what Google did to search and now to advertising created a platform. What Amazon started out selling books on the internet, went to selling other things to those same people, building a model of how this person buys, building a model of how the segment operates, and changes its offerings based on the behavior of that segment. If I can think about a machine and the way the machine operates in a certain environment, just take a jet engine. We've probably all flown in planes. One of the things we make in our company is jet engines. These jet engines get attached to wings and fly around the world. The same engine on the same airplane. Think of your car when you buy a car. It comes with a manual. It tells you every 5,000 kilometers, change the oil, change the brake pads, it's all driven by time. 5,000 kilometers do this, every year do that, etc. Now things are very different in the real world because how you drive your car and how I drive my car or where I drive it or what I do with it is quite different. The same jet engine on the same airplane flying in different places, subject to different environmental conditions, subject to different humidity, heat, dust, moisture, subject to different operating conditions on how long is the runway, how short is the flight, how many cycles are you doing, is going to operate completely differently. And to subject that to every 3,000 kilometers do this makes absolutely no sense. It's why accidents happen. It's why you lose money. It's why productivity is not where it needs to be. So the physical and the digital worlds coming together, if you understand the physics of a jet engine and the terabyte of data that comes out of a jet engine every day, and combine that with the power of deep learning, artificial intelligence, and data science, you can build something we call a digital twin. You can actually build a twin of this engine in the virtual world that is constantly learning and constantly predicting what's going to happen to this device. And over time, it gets smart enough that it actually looks ahead. When you look ahead and when you can start to look ahead, what can you do? When you can start to look ahead, you can start to tell Jet Airways, for example, that this engine that's coming up for a maintenance cycle right now, that's not the one you need to worry about. Keep flying it. But this other one, by the way, that's been flying to Dubai and back every day, that's in trouble. That's the one you want to send over. What does that do? That improves availability, reduces downtime, reduces cost, and increases outcome. So the industrial, if I take a wind farm, solar energy, wind energy, renewable energy is another big topic in our country and around the world. If I take a wind farm and I start thinking about, can I actually decide which way to pitch the blades and which way to face the turbines so that the output of my entire wind farm is actually increased based on predicting how the wind's going to blow and when it's going to blow. When we've done that with pilots, we've seen anywhere from 4 to 8% increase in energy with software and physics. Understanding of physical world and digital world. I call it energy out of thin air because that's really what it is. More energy out of thin air. But you got to understand the data science and you got to understand the domain that you're playing in order to drive those outcomes. So I look at healthcare. We saw some examples of ECG devices. And so if you just go back a few years and you look at the World Health Organization, they put out a report in 2011 projecting the next 20 years of cardiac disease burden in the world. And their projection was that 42% of the new cardiac disease in the world will be discovered in South Asian subcontinent over the next 20 years. Now, it's not a surprise to many of us because we know this is a big deal, genetically, lifestyle-wise, etc. Now, there's technologies that have been available, physical technologies, for many, many years, like ECG and others, that can detect cardiac disease early. That's been there. We make over 30 machines that do ECG. But now if I want to early detect cardiac disease for the 80% of the population in India that lives more than 100 kilometers away from the nearest clinic that can actually diagnose, nearest cardiologist that can actually diagnose this disease, how do I do it? I can't do it by just taking an affordable ECG machine and putting it in the hands of people. I can't. We tried that. It didn't work. We have an ECG machine that is less than 25,000 rupees. That alone doesn't solve the problem. High quality machine, all of that. What really solves the problem is the domain. The algorithms that come from understanding the last 300,000 ECGs that we've read. And translating that to saying, you're okay, or you need to go see a cardiologist. That's the only decision you need to make when you're screening somebody for an early outcome. Now, each of these examples, whether it's an aircraft engine flying around different parts of the world, or a wind farm generating wind, or somebody that's trying to see if they're healthy or not, each of these is an example of physical plus digital changing the game on the outcome. And that's, I think, where the future of the industrial internet has to really head. And we're an industrial company. I'm going to skip over some of these in the interest of time. By the way, this data, I was kind of looking at, look at this number here, 10 to the 6 terabytes a day generated by GE machines. That's 10 to the 6 terabytes is 1 exabyte. 1 exabyte is the amount of data that comes out from just one company's machines in a day. 5 exabytes is what the entire human race has spoken since the beginning of time. If you took every spoken word uttered by human beings since the beginning of time, that's 5 exabytes. The scale of data is unbelievable, what we're dealing with. Now, you've got to find the needle in the haystack. You can find that purely with digital technologies, but my submission would be, if you understand the physics, you're going to be a lot better off in terms of predicting. And so we're an industrial company, right? We think advanced data science plus physics plus applied engineering really is what drives the outcomes. And this is not something we're doing to others, we're doing it to ourselves. We're doing it to ourselves first. This thing about GE for GE is really about what we're doing to change GE first. So we run about 400 factories around the world. We have about 21,000 jet engines flying around the world on any given day. 1/3 of the world's electricity is generated on a GE machine, and 60% of the world's electrons touch a GE machine, either from generation to consumption. So this is about first applying it to ourselves and learning from that, and then taking that and saying, what can we do for our customers? The only thing that matters in the industrial world is, are you changing the outcome? Are you making it more available, more productive, more predictive, more healthy, more efficient? That's the only thing that matters. Nothing else actually matters. And in the industrial world, I think this is still nascent, still evolving. But I think when we talk about the consumer world and the industrial world, 7 or 8 billion people on the planet will be all connected at some point. 20 billion machines by 2020. Who knows how many after that? So the possibilities are orders of magnitude, different. We talked a bit about jet engines. I just want to talk about, again, an example of the physics. So in a jet engine, you have something called a turbine shroud. A turbine shroud is a critical component of a jet engine. It does two things. The turbine shroud is responsible for maintaining the tolerances between the airflow and the spinning of the blades, which drives efficiency of the engine. The second thing it's responsible for is to keep the engine running at the right operating temperature. A jet engine actually runs at operating temperatures higher than the melting point of the metals that were used to make the jet engine. So cooling of this is incredibly important. As you might imagine, a critical component like a turbine shroud takes a lot of beating. Now, typically, we would do this, and the industry would have done this in a certain way. They said, now if you look at this graph, I don't know how visible it is, the bottom, the x-axis, the horizontal axis, talks about cycles. A cycle is a takeoff and landing, number of cycles. And the vertical axis talks about cumulative distress. So this is the beating that it's taking over those cycles. Now, in a purely physics-based model, which is what all of our maintenance records and maintenance recommendations are based on, you would see the lower graph in terms of predicting the cumulative damage on these particular parts. But now you start looking at where are these engines flying, what are they encountering, and you start to see a divergence. You start to see the ones in hot and harsh environments behaving very differently. So if I take weather data, atmospheric data, engine performance data, sensors, pilot operating, how much thrust are they using on takeoff, et cetera, and I put it together, I can start predicting what that particular engine is going to do, and when that shroud is going to have cumulative damage that it can cause a problem in the engine, and when should I bring that specific engine back in, back to the digital twin. Physics plus analytics changes the game. More so, we've operated in the physical world all our lives. We're seeing it change the game. I'll skip this one. We talked about the wind turbines. Listen, I just want to leave you with one thing, which is sensors, software, machine learning, analytics, data science. Ultimately, only one thing matters, outcomes. Outcomes in the world that we live in depend on the things we see and feel around us. My appeal to this community and to the IoT community at large would be, don't forget all of the life-sustaining infrastructure around us. Innovate in that space. We've invested large in a platform of innovation called Predix. We call it Predix. We think the industrial world and the consumer world require different platforms in order to innovate. From the perspective of, number one, when you can't, when something fails on a consumer platform, maybe you can't buy a song from your phone. When something fails on an industrial platform, you get blackouts in cities. When something fails on a consumer platform and there's a security threat, people might be able to read your private data. When something fails on an industrial platform or a national platform, you have cyber warfare. So these platforms are fundamentally different. We've invested over $1 billion on Predix already. It's available and open access, and you guys can all use it. You can see it in the booth in terms of healthcare applications for Predix. Listen, it's been great. Thank you very much, and we'll talk to you soon. Yeah.
Thank you, Munesh. Thank you. Excellent talk.
Thank you.
Could I invite Shalini to come on stage and give a quick memento to Munesh, please?
Nice talk.
Thank you. Thank you very much.